and welcome to the Olive Branch Community Church. My name is Kathy, and it's super good to be with you here today. Today, Pastor Ken starts a new series entitled, It's Late, What Are You Waiting For? And it's talking about the way we use our time. What are we spending our time on in our lives? Are our priorities lined up with what God teaches us through His Word? Or are they kind of, off-center? And it's just a reality that we are faced with as human beings who live in a world that isn't oriented towards God's priorities. So it's really fantastic to always be reflective about how is it that we are spending our time. And we're going to get some stuff right and we're going to get some stuff wrong, but it's always good to leave that space open for God to speak into our lives about what we need to be spending our time on, because it's our most valuable resource. So let's dive into the worship and then get into what God has to say to us today.
I believe that the blood of Jesus washes white as snow. I believe that the power of the gospel makes the broken whole. I believe that the curse of sin was broken when they rolled away that stone. I believe, I believe, I believe. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. And no matter where I go, and no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. I believe that the walls will start falling when we fall down on our knees. I believe that the lame will go walking in the blind they're gonna see. I believe that the gates of hell will tremble when the church begins to say, I believe, I believe, I believe. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. And no matter where I go, and no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. Sing it to the daughters, sing it to the sons, to every generation. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the darkness, but the light has come. Sing it to the nations. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the daughters, sing it to the sons, to every generation. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the darkness, that the light has come. Sing it to the nation. Look at what the Lord has done.
good to see you, and today we start a new series of talks called It's Late. It's late, and you'll kind of understand this the further we go along. So no matter how you use, maybe you have one of these and you carry it around on your wrist and it's on, maybe you tell time with that, or whether you use a wristwatch or use your cell phone and you look at the time on that, which is probably the most convenient way to do it. You know what the whole thing is about being late, and so we watch our clocks. We don't want to be late anywhere. Years ago, there was an episode of The Simpsons called Bart After Dark, okay? So it starts with Homer watching TV, who's the ultimate goofball, right? So just before the news announcer comes on, it asks the question, it's 11 o'clock, do you know where your children are? And Homer yells out, I told you last night, no. And of course, some of you probably remember it being a public service announcement. It actually started coming out in the 60s when there was a lot of unrest and urban riots and things like that were going on at that particular time. Maybe the question today would be, do you know where your children are? Maybe the question would be, do you know where their cell phones are? Because that could probably create more trouble. We all understand this whole concept, and and nobody wants their kids to be out late, because we know that after dark, there's not a lot of good things that happen, and kids like to hide some of the stuff that they're doing under the cover of darkness, but there are also predators out there. Bad stuff happens sometimes after dark, but it doesn't just apply to the time of day. Sometime, if you're waiting for your spouse or your girlfriend or somebody you care about to get home and they're late, like they're half an hour late, then they're an hour late, then they're an hour and a half late, and if they haven't texted you and told you what's going on, you begin to get worried. You think, what's going on? How come they're so late? Sometimes you're late, not in terms of time, but you know that you've got a paper that's due or a project that's due, and you're kind of running it out to the end, and it's late, and you're thinking, what is going to happen when this thing is late? Years ago, I was speaking at an Easter service at our church, and we had prepared, a lot of time, put a lot of effort into making this thing happen with drama and lights and everything like that. And I'm still writing the message when it's almost time to start the service. And I actually had to get up and give the talk, before I'd even finished the message. And I thought to myself, I am never going to do this again, because it's such an awful feeling, to be late and to have that kind of pressure. Worst stories about being late have to do with the person being in danger. Is that, we tried to save them, but it was too late. Or a person who has symptoms that they ought to be watching, but they're scared to go in and get it checked because something might happen. And then they wait until it's too late to actually help them. Now, don't get nervous, okay? This series of talks isn't going to be about all these bad stories and disaster scenarios and people feeling bad about the opportunities. It says in this passage we're going to be looking at, it says it's late, but it's not saying it's too late. In the passage we're going to be studying, which is basically about 3 or 4 verses, it talks about this in the context of what is going on in our culture, and it reflects exactly what Jesus said. Jesus said, man, keep your eyes open. Watch. Make sure the ultimate day that's going to be coming doesn't overtake you. Now, the thinking behind where I'm sitting, okay, from what I'm seeing, everything on this world is pretty much on a trajectory. And that trajectory looks a little bit like this, okay? You've heard exponential curve, you've probably heard of that, and that means that it starts out shallow and it just keeps getting steeper and steeper and steeper. It's kind of the impact that it has, and then the time plus the pressure. And a best way maybe to illustrate this is with a piece of paper, and I found this out a long time ago, so I'm going to fold this thing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Now, if you look at this thing, it's about 1/4 of an inch thick. Now, if I folded this 42 times or 43 times, you know how thick it would be? If you're guessing a mile, you're off. If you're guessing, 5 miles or 100 miles, you're off. It would be the distance from here to the moon. If I folded it 103 times, it would be as wide as the observable universe is. I mean, it's just incredible. You begin to multiply that. And of course, that's what works with our finances. You begin to multiply the exponential curve when it comes to money, and it makes out for a great investment. Now, I'm going to take a look at a book, the book of Romans. at a part in chapter 13 of this book, a part that I really had almost forgotten about. And I was thinking about this whole concept of it being late and we're kind of on this trajectory and so on. And I read these verses again. I'm telling you, I was challenged by what it had to say. And I think, you look at Romans chapter 1 to 11, and it pretty much explains, what has happened to this world, why sin has had such a grip on it, and what it's done to this world, and what God has done to make things new, and what God has done to make things right. And it tells us in these passages, it says, we're all sinners. We've all failed. We've all fallen short of what God wants us to be. And it tells us that God has made a way for every person to be redeemed and to be saved and to be brought back. Paul identifies in here with this crisis that we feel in our own lives, where we think, I'm trying hard and I want to do what's right, and I keep doing what's wrong. And he identifies with that, and he says that Jesus Christ and the power of the Spirit is the power that helps us to get beyond that. At the very beginning of this book in Romans chapter 1, he says that sin has come into this world and it has basically overwhelmed all the systems of the world. It's the breaking of shalom, the peace and the order and the wholeness that God created things with. That's what he intended for it, and sin has broken that, and it's basically screwed everything up. Romans chapter 12 gets very specific, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, about what it takes at the core for human beings to be able to change and to change the trajectory of their own lives. It's one thing to be forgiven. It's another thing to actually be saved from our sin, and that is bought back from it, changed so that it doesn't keep on doing its destructive work. But it says we have to surrender. We have to surrender. He says, I beg you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice to God. You got to surrender yourself, and then your whole mind gets renewed. You want to do things differently, and then you get transformed in the process. And then in this passage, he talks about what happens in us. We have no power on our own to influence others and to make the difference in this world. But when God's love gets a hold of us and it infiltrates us and it begins to renew our mind and renew the way we think about life, it has a transforming effect. Now, right after that, Paul says this. He says, don't overestimate yourself. Don't think you're better than you really are. Don't go into a room thinking you're God's gift to that room and God's gift to humanity. He says, so don't overestimate yourself. But he said also, don't underestimate yourself. And he goes on to say, he says, later after that, he says, God has given you gifts. God has given you abilities. God has given you power through the Spirit to make the difference that you want to make in this world. Don't underestimate what he can do through a single human being who is fully devoted to him. But he says it actually works in kind of a body. You're like one body part. You can't do a whole lot on your own. But if you unite with other people in the body of Christ and you love them and serve them and work with them, great things can happen through that body. So there's this part of us loving one another. It says this. He says, don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. And that's what goes on in the inside of God's gathering. And then he talks about what it's supposed to look like when it gets outside of that gathering. He says, never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see that you are honorable. Do all that you can do to live in peace with one another. Don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good, which makes a difference. The chapter we're going to be studying in Romans chapter 13 starts out in a very unusual way. And it says, everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. And then we begin to think, well, that certainly doesn't apply to the politicians I know. I don't think they came from God. I don't think they have anything to do with God. When it goes on to say, so anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished. He basically is saying here, don't think that, you can just rebel against somebody that you think maybe hasn't been put there by God. God is at work doing something in them, doing something in the world. He is the one who puts rulers in place, and he's the one who takes them down. You have to put your confidence in God. And of course, if they tell you to do something that God tells you not to do, then you have to say, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go circumvent you and go to your authority, which is the one who runs the universe. Now, you have to understand the context that Paul is talking is being run by Nero, the emperor of Rome. Okay, so Nero started in 54 AD. This is around 57 AD. This has to be one of the most evil leaders who's ever led anything, okay? And he hated Christians. He burned Rome and blamed the Christians for it. He would take Christians, dip them in wax, and use them as torches in his garden. He was one who ultimately executed Paul. So Paul, in talking about submitting to authorities, is talking about this authority, which is a very strange thing. What is important to understand here is that God is at work in all of history. Every leader in history ultimately gives account to him for how they've treated people and for what they're doing. Now, given this series of talks, it's late. It's important to understand who is in charge of history. Who is in charge of history? Then this passage switches from, the leaders of nations and doing what they need to do, and then it talks about God's love, and you could call it God's weapon of mass construction, okay, which is love. Now, it's different than what we hear in songs. There's a lot of songs about love. The Beatles sang, all you need is love, da-da-da-da-da. And that's nice, but it doesn't refer to what God is. He's talking about supernatural love. It's not thinking nice thoughts about annoying people. It's about loving your enemies. It's about loving people who actually make your life miserable. It's the kind of love that Jesus revealed at the cross. And as they're pounding the nails through his hands, he's praying for those who are crucifying him and saying, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And this is what he says. This is the kind of love that flipped the world system on his back, flipped the whole Roman Empire on his back. And historians still don't understand how that happened. He says, owe nothing to anyone except for your obligation to love one another. And he says this is basically parroting what Jesus said. If you love your neighbor, you will fulfill the requirements of God's law. Love does no wrong to others, so love fulfills the requirements of God's law. Love changes everything. See, loving your neighbor as yourself doesn't mean, just keeping you from doing bad things to them. It means treating them as you would want to be treated. And Jesus said, if you need a visual of that, then you love others as I have loved you. And all of his disciples would be able to describe what that was like. How he accepted Matthew, who was a tax collector. And he would say, Matthew, when you were collecting taxes, who were you thinking about? He said, well, I was thinking about myself. I turned against my country, turned against my family. I ruined people because I loved money. I wanted more money. He says, okay, how did I love you? He said, well, you accepted me just as I was. That is the context for Paul's next words, summarized in the title to this series. It's late. It's late. Love others because it's late. Listen to what he says. This is all the more urgent, for you know how late it is. Time is running out. Wake up, for our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is almost gone. The day of salvation will soon be here. Now, we're going to spend some time on this passage here, but what I want to pick up on is what Paul says. It's urgent. He says, I don't want you to put this off. Don't just say, well, I'm going to do it another day. Do it now. So you could actually take a look at it and think, well, time is running out. For what? I mean, they must have a really slow hourglass, because, this is like 57 AD. He's writing this, and you've got, a whole bunch of years more to go. Night is almost gone. The day of salvation will soon be here. Well, that's right, Paul. People usually do sleep at night, Jesus said that when he comes, everyone will know it. Maybe that will be the alarm, okay? And that'll be, it's all going to happen, so I better get my act together. Now, I know that might sound a little bit sacrilegious to you, but isn't that the way most people think? Well, I don't have to get real worried unless, it's imminent, like he's going to show up. And for some of us, it almost sounds like, and maybe it doesn't, maybe we don't mean it, but you've probably heard it from televangelists, or from an evangelist sometime in your past, you better be ready, because if Jesus comes and he catches you in a movie theater or doing something, with your girlfriend or whatever, you might get left behind. And that thought, with all due respect, it almost sounds selfish. Well, as long as I get saved, who cares about the rest? And Paul is talking here about love. He's talking about not just being loved, he's talking about letting the supernatural, powerful love of God move through your life because it's urgent, because time is running out. A better, more accurate way of this would be you only have so long to invest. Let me give you an example of that. My parents, small town church ministry, that they were involved in started in, I think, 1950, 1951, okay? So my dad made $19 a week, okay? That's not much, okay? So the thought is, well, you got to save some of that because you're going to retire someday. Well, he's thinking and they're thinking, well, Jesus is probably going to come back before we actually retire, so we'll be okay. After all, we only make $19 a week. Now, they were generous to a fault, okay? I know that. But, if you think, okay, well, 10%, let's say you save 10% of that, 10% is almost like just $2. Couldn't you save $2? I thought, no, we don't have enough money, $2 will buy diapers for a week, and so we need to use that money for our kids. So they didn't. And the problem was that they still didn't save when they made a lot more than that. And finally, they get into their early 60s, and they thought, wow, retirement is coming up. We better save for it. Well, you want to invest before that. But again, the thought was, well, we probably won't ever retire because Jesus is going to come back. Now, the context here is that love is the investment that you make in other people on Jesus' behalf. And that investment grows. We all look to the future of something that we're going to have to pay for, like retirement, and we think, okay, I better start investing in that. Well, kind of the ultimate place that we need to be thinking about is eternity and the eternities of the people that are around us. Now, this was tough. Roman Empire had no patient, their password is Caesar is Lord, and if you said Jesus is Lord, you could very likely be killed because, they didn't want anybody running things except for Caesar. And they had no respect for Jesus. He'd been crucified. Only scum were crucified, so they had no respect for Jesus. The urgency, it's late, time is up, wake up, was referring to the times that they were living in and to the people who needed to give their lives back to Jesus and learn how to love Jesus. It was late for the people who needed Jesus. And he says it's urgent. You need to invest. If God is going to do on this planet what he wants to do, you have to take this seriously. You can't just doze off and say, I'm going to wait till a better time. And love is our only weapon. If love was urgent then, you better believe it's urgent now. We are called to love. That's how God works in human hearts. That's how he is going to change the world. Let me just kind of illustrate this, okay? When you pour love into somebody's life, what it does is it kind of fills their heart. They remember it. Nobody forgets being loved by somebody else, especially if you've been mean to them and they've loved you in return, okay? So it kind of provides the padding so that when the good news comes into their heart, it provides a context for the good news. If there's no context for the good news, then, sometimes it gets lost in the whole shuffle. They think it's just another program. So love is God's weapon of mass construction. He wants to rebuild this world. And his way of doing that is through love. It's our only weapon. It's our only weapon. Politics is not a good weapon to use, not for Christians. Anything that has to do with that, with power, tends to corrupt love. In fact, love is holding everything back. If you're thinking, well, why doesn't Jesus come back? I'm getting a little bit tired of all this mess. Well, the reason is he's being patient. He cares about your friends. He cares about the people who are still lost to him. And it's the reason, why Jesus came in the first place. He didn't want anybody to perish. And it's the same reason why he's holding things back. He doesn't want anybody to perish, especially the people who know you. Now, there's a whole thing that's going on in terms of the exponential thing, part of this world. If you look at the history of the GTA, what you find out is that the GTA has grown in the last, back in 1960, there were, I think it was 2 million people here, and now there are like 6.5 million people here. That's a lot of growth. Imagine what it's going to be like 20 years out. They're saying that this area is probably going to grow by somewhere between 4 and 5 million people. And I want you to imagine that. That is exponential growth. And it's going to change things. When people come to this part of the world, they come from all over the world, okay? And you notice this recently, probably, when the whole thing happened between Hamas and Israel. We had two groups going on in support of each one. You had a support the Palestinians group meeting there saying, support the Palestinians. And then you have a group meeting and they're saying, support the Israelites. So people bring all of the beautiful things from their culture here, But they also bring, the baggage that they have and all the resentments and the injustices that they've been through and all that stuff. And it has a way of just creating all kinds of problems. Now, you multiply that out through all of the countries and through all the megacities in the world, and in a population that is going to grow by 2 billion in the next, 20 years. And I'm telling you, think about what it's going to take to support that. It's exponential. And can that go on for another 50 years? Can that go on for another 100 years? It's late. It's late. And there's the divisiveness in our world. Uniting any group of people, even bringing a family together, is really tough. And we live in a world that is more divided than ever. I think it would be safe to say it's splintered into all kinds of fragments, and trying to bring people together is huge. We live in a world that has lost, they talk about being tolerant. We've lost the ability to be tolerant. You send your thing out there on Instagram or Facebook, about what you really believe in, and if people don't like it, then you basically, find your favorite rant, and send it out after them. And we divide over dumb things. We went through a health crisis recently with COVID and everything that happened. People had to go in and stuff. You think that, okay, let's join together. Let's come together in this because we're all in jeopardy. What do? We fought over it. It got more divisive than ever. And you can't keep taking that out exponentially. Something has to give. And then there's the really scary prospect of 2 rogue nations in our world right now who have nuclear power, okay? Iran and North Korea. How long is that going to be okay? What do you think? You take that out and multiply it by, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. What's that going to look like? USSR and the USA, locked horns over communism and democracy back when I was a kid, okay? And started building up nuclear arsenals, that could destroy the world multiple times over. I used to think to myself, man, somebody's going to get an itchy finger, or, somebody's gonna, like we're one temper tantrum away from being obliterated. It's scary. And now Israel is encircled by nations that hate them and at war with 3 of them. You just begin to take that out exponentially. How long can that go on? It's late. Our staff recently sat down with our IT person, Joel Charter, and he identified, that there's this whole thing going on out there, which about, brilliant, skilled hackers who would love to get into our information, get into our emails, get all of this stuff and rip us off if they can. These are brilliant people, and they're using it to rip people off. It's scary. And think about where the internet has gone. I was watching a show last night just basically about the internet. It was about the 90s, and it was talking about how that when the internet first started coming out in 1996, 1997, people were thinking, it's going to be like a group hug in the world. We're all going to love each other and know each other. Well, what it did was it created even more division. And one of the first things that went up was somebody who was selling sex online and made $77 million on it. And it's kind of this pipeline that carries good things, information, helps us understand what's going on, but it also carries sewage. We all know that. How long can that go on? How long can it go on? You trace it out 20 years, 30 years, 40 more years. It's really only been, 25 years since the thing came into existence? It's late. And then there's the family. The family was intended, to be a place of safety and nurture, where kids were taught, wisdom, where they were taught the rules of the world and how they should live in it and how they could be prosperous. Every family has, some kind of dysfunction in it. But I'm telling you, in the 21st century, we have taken this out to a whole new level. We are lonelier than ever, which means that we are, more vulnerable than ever. And then you add to that mental health issues and addiction, and all the crises that came out by the fear caused in COVID. You can't just keep on doing that. It goes exponentially. And the pressures on family and marriages and parents, it's enormous. Technology has, made it worse, not better. You just project this out for 20 more years, 30 more years, 40 more years of dysfunction. What's it going to look like? It's late. Paul said in Romans 1 of this same book that sin is the twisting of everything. including sexuality. And he gives some examples of that, you know. And I tell you, I've been really surprised how that the pressure of our culture and our government has made it illegal and basically unacceptable to say that anything's wrong. Like, you know, you can get nailed for slander. I agree that everyone should be treated with love and everyone should be treated with respect and valued as a person who is made in the image of God. That's what Jesus said. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm seeing is that just about everything in our world has been sexualized. And you know this if you watch any ads. The people have begun to market themselves. Look at how desirable I am. Don't you want me? Trolling themselves like a lure, you know, trying to catch a salmon. How far can you take that out? I mean, do you think that people are just going to at some point say, I'm done with this, you know, I'm sick with taking all the selfies and stuff like this, you know, so I'm just going to kind of let myself be me wherever I'm at. That's not going to happen. So just play this out 20 or 30 or 40 years. Think of the victims. Think of teens and children who want to be, you know, who want love and need love and affection, not sex. You don't have to be brilliant to understand that you just can't keep playing this stuff out and pushing it out. And then the ecology, the environment. Lots of people are concerned about that, right? That you can't keep dumping garbage into the rivers and the ocean. And you can't keep, you know, annihilating everything, all the forms of, you know, that are developing oxygen, you know. That we have been created, that this place that we've been living in, the earth, has been created by God as a great place to grow. But you can't keep wrecking it and expect, you know, that everything's going to be okay. You know, people, you know, kind of feel spiritual about owning an electric car. That's a good thing. But electricity doesn't just come up from the ground, you know. Electricity has to be produced, and it takes nuclear energy to produce it, or it takes Niagara Falls, or it takes coal. It's not like, you know, it's just this thing that happens out there. And we just have to understand. You add, you know, all the people that are coming onto the planet, you know, in the next, you know, 20, 30, 40 years, you know, and probably, I mean, it's multiplied from 1960 up till now. It's gone up 5 billion people. So you just kind of multiply that out. What's it going to have? What's going to be the effect? There's global warming. What's going to be the effect of that? What's going to happen if this stuff starts to rise? You know, the oceans start to rise. It just is unsustainable. It's late. Now, I could go on, but I'm not going to, and you're probably glad. And I'm not trying to be scary. I'm not trying to, you know, be depressing. I'm not trying to, you know, think, oh no, you know, the whole planet's going up. I'm not trying to think. God is in control of all that. But what we are in right now is an undeniable, unstoppable, inevitable process called entropy, okay? Entropy is basically, among other things, it's the natural move of everything from order to disorder. You know, when, you know, something dies, that's what happens. It moves from order and working together and blood cells going through your body to, you know, to disorder. That's what happens. Paul, the author of the passage that we're looking at, he knew this. In Romans 7, he says about himself, and this is kind of the entropy in our lives, and everybody can relate to this. He says, I know the right thing to do. I know what's right to do, and I want to do it, and I try to do it, but then I do the opposite. And he says, this happens so frequently, it's predictable. And I could say, wow, I can identify with that. Most of you can too. The way this looks is that, you know, when it comes to the whole exponential curve, that there's time, okay, and all these different factors, population and nuclear threat and divisiveness and greed and, you know, environmental issues and self-obsession and use of resources, that these are all going up, and they kind of get to a point where it's unsustainable. So we know that entropy is going on in our planet. But it also goes on in the human soul, and it wrecks people. Paul, right before his death, he wrote this letter to Timothy, okay, as kind of a snapshot of what things are going to look like. Listen to what he said. He said, you should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times. I say, well, hello, that would be true. For people will love only themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. And there will be nothing considered sacred. They will be unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. They will be cruel and hate what is good. They will betray their friends, be reckless, be puffed up with pride, and love pleasure rather than God. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. Now, I want you to think about that for just a minute, okay? I kind of put it up here just so that we can take a look at it and see, okay? So what do you think? Is this descriptive or not? The people love themselves and their money. What do you think? The people were proud. You know, when people talk about God, it's like, forget about him, not too worried about that. That people were, disobedient to their parents. Does that describe kind of what goes on? It describes me when I was a kid, okay? Ungrateful, come on, what about me? We want to keep taking without saying thank you, especially to parents. Unloving, unforgiving. What about slanderous? Does slander go on, you think, in our world? Cruel. People betray their friends. Does that happen? How about no self-control? Yeah. Reckless. Love pleasure rather than God. They're religious, but there's no power to it. In other words, they go through the form of it, but it doesn't really change their lives. Now, is this descriptive, or do you think this is just an exaggeration? I would say it's probably more descriptive. I think I could check off every one of those things there. Now, how could he be so accurate in describing what's going on in 2023, in large part? Because he knew we are stuck in this entropy, and it happens all the time. I mean, the world that he lived in was like this too. The Rome was like this, when you looked at the leaders, you think the leaders are bad now? Go back to Rome. Look at them. The only thing that can reverse this process or slow down the spiritual entropy that's going on in our world is the power of God. And the power of God is seen, and it comes through love. And it comes out when people learn how to love instead of just trying to get back at people. That's what we're called to do. And if we're honest and authentic, we could all say that even though we belong to Jesus, and even though we have his Spirit living in us, and sin has been renounced and turned away from, it doesn't just over time get better by itself. There's this part of us that has to surrender to God and say, God, I want to bring this to you, and I need your Spirit of love and grace and kindness to fill me and give me power to say no. Because the other side of this is you feed an addiction and it grows. We all know that's to be true, right? Entropy and decay and disintegration is what happens naturally. And when you play it out, like I've shown you on this whole thing, that's what happens to a whole world system. That's why, Paul says, it's late. Without power of God, things are not going to turn around. The concern for the poor and needy, people will sometimes do this if they can get credit for it, but, if it's going to cost them their money or their comfort, absolutely not. The only way that love and grace and forgiveness can overtake the years of resentment and the years of injustice and racism and all the mess that it's caused is the power that God gives for us to forgive and to let it go. The love for power and control, which is seen in the accumulation of guns and nuclear weapons and so on. It's not going to just dismiss on its own. It's going to come when people submit to the power of God. And they say, I believe in his power, not in anything else. Our world longs for peace and order. And Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He came to bring peace. That was one of his main missions, to bring peace to our hearts and peace to this world and peace to governments and peace to everyone who wants it. But I'll tell you what's going on. When you read about the end times, what you find out is that there's another person that's going to come along called the Antichrist who's also going to promise peace. And he'll say, I'll give you peace, and you don't even have to humble your pride. You don't even have to say you're sorry to anybody. You don't have to repent of your sin. I'm just going to manage it all with power. And people will turn to him. And that's going to be the end when both sides kind of come against each other. Now, here's what I believe with all my heart. It's time for followers of Jesus to decide who they're going to be for. I mean, is it going to be Jesus? Or is it going to be you? Is it going to be whoever brings the best deal your way? Who's it going to be? What's it going to be? Based on everything that we see in this passage, this entire book, and everything that Jesus taught, the only hope for this world system is love. And the way that God has chosen to show love to this world is by sending his son, Jesus Christ, who then sends his Spirit into the hearts of human beings who follow Jesus, where they give their control of their lives over to him. And then he loves in extraordinary ways through them. That's what turned the Roman Empire around. That's what changed everything in this world, when people started putting him first. And I'll tell you what, they overcame a lot of the stuff that went on. They overcame slavery, and they overcame, the infanticide, all the junk that was going on, and using women as property and all that stuff. It's the most powerful force in the world. And you want to invest it with your life. See, this is kind of what the other side of this looks like, this whole exponential curve. When you invest love, let's say you decide, that you're going to love 2 people in this next year. And you love them in spectacular ways, and they all those 2 people decide that they're going to love 2 people in the next year along with you. So then it goes from there to 6. And then all of those who've been loved decide, including yourself, decide, well, we're all going to love somebody else. And it goes to 12. And then it goes to 24, and then it goes to 48, and then it goes to 96, and 192, and 384, and 768, and it just keeps going up from there. And when you invest in people, what they do with their lives also in some ways gets credited to what you're doing. You want to talk about an investment of a lifetime? That's an investment of a lifetime. And that's what this is about. You don't want to wait to the last minute to invest in what God is up to, which is changing this world. Darkness is almost gone. Night is almost over. This is all the more urgent, for you know how late it is. Time is running out. Wake up, for our salvation is nearer now than we first believed. And so my question is, do you know where you are? Like, where have you dropped your anchor? Years ago, when I was a teenager, we used to go on vacation up around North Bay, a place called Restoule. So we're fishing this river, and it was fairly remote. There was like one cottage on this whole thing in a government dock, and that was it. Okay, so we went onto this lake, and then we went down a river where the pickerel fishing was particularly good. So you have to understand, we're down there catching pickerel, and we ain't about to give it up, especially my dad. He was a fisherman, and he'd stay down there until the last, crack of light on the horizon. So he finally decided it's time to get out. We got to get to the government dock and get home. So by that time, so he started up the engine. This is old 1957 Mercury outboard, 30 horsepower. Starts this thing up, and it went for a little bit, and then it conked, and it officially died on the back of our boat. So we had to figure out what we were going to do. And of course, the only thing to do when you're down this river and there's nobody else around, you got to paddle out, So we paddled out to the where this river went into the lake. By the time we got there, it was pitch black. I mean, you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. And we thought, okay, well, what are we going to do? So we paddled around a little bit, tried to find this government dock, and I'll tell you, we couldn't find it. So we finally thought, okay, we're going to head towards the light. So we went towards the light and came up onto this dock of these people who had this cottage. And fortunately, somebody was home. So this guy comes out, and he's pretty reluctant to do anything. He's kind of, well, you just go over there, you should be able to find it. My dad's like giving him the whole, sad spiel. I've got my 3-year-old daughter, and my teenage son here, and we finally gave him all the fish that we'd caught, and he decided to. So he's towing us over. He's got a huge searchlight on his boat. It took him almost an hour to find the government dock and get us to it. And we were saved. And so maybe the question this morning is, do you know where you are? Do you know where your anchor is? Do you know where your anchor is? And do you know where you're headed? Let's pray. God, we live in a world that is very confusing and sometimes very dark. We love it. We love people. We love our technology. We love, all the things that we get offered, Lord. We have plenty of food. We have homes. We have lots of good things. But sometimes the truth is that we've got all these good things and we're not headed in a good direction. And time's running out. Help us, Lord, to see our lives for what they are. Help us to see the investment opportunities, what it means to invest love in other people and see their lives changed and understand what we can accomplish, what we can do to turn the tide, of wrong that's going on here. Help us to be smart. Help us to live with wisdom and be the people that you want us to be and make the difference you've called us to make. Amen. So may God, who gives you peace, who gives you strength, who will help you love, turn you into an outrageous lover who's able to even love your enemies and people who make your life miserable. May God go with you.
When that shoebox is open, they're overjoyed.
You can see them shouting, jumping.
Oh! Look at how much they are excited. This is the first time those children are receiving the shoe boxes. They are so happy.
Every box is important because every box is an opportunity to tell a child about God's love, about His Son, Jesus Christ.
If you get the heart of the child, you will reach the heart of the parents, you will reach the heart of the family, and then you will touch the community. That gift box is the beginning into their hearts.
Isn't it incredible how these gifts touch the lives of these children? Every year we see tens of thousands of children discipled. And we couldn't do this without you, so thank you for packing the boxes. Thank you for praying for these children around the world. God bless you, and keep packing those boxes.